power of public speaking. So let's welcome on the stage Mr. Brian Jenner with his speech. Please, a round, warm of applause.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Right. My name is Brian, and I'm afraid of public speaking. I thought some of you might be members of other public speaking clubs, but maybe not. Maybe Darren referred to it a bit. But I'm very happy to be back here in Milan. I was last here 35 years ago. Very famous debating club, the most famous debating club in the world, called the Oxford Union. And that's where all the young students learn their political skills. And I went up to Oxford, and suddenly I saw all these student politicians talking in front of audiences of 500 people. And I was absolutely terrified. I saw the young Boris Johnson before he was famous. And I wanted to have a go, but I was just too terrified. I couldn't do it. But a couple of years passed and I left university, and I still wanted to do politics, but I hadn't overcome this problem of how do I learn to speak in public. And then I had an even bigger problem. I didn't really have a job. So now my mother told me about this club called Toastmasters, and I thought it was fantastic. And I was living in the provinces, and unfortunately there was no club in my area. But 18 months later, my search for a job took me to London. And my first act when I'd got my telephone installed was to phone a Toastmasters club. And I said to the membership secretary, I really want to come and join your club. And he said, I'm very sorry, we're not accepting any new members. I had to beg him to come along as a guest. And so I went along as a guest, and I thought, again, these people were so good. They're really confident and good speakers. And I thought, well, with my education, I should be good at this. And then I went to do my first table topic. And this was after about 3 meetings. And I strode up to the front of the audience, and I started speaking, and I got 15 seconds in, and suddenly I panicked. And I said, I apologize, I'm very sorry, I'm going to have to sit down. Now, you know how supportive and sensitive Toastmasters are. I remember a lady in the audience saying, I overheard her, she said, it's not that difficult. So 2 hours later, I went to the underground, and I was still glowing with embarrassment. So what this made me do is I wanted to throw my energy into Toastmasters and to get really good at it. And, I'd go home and sort of, I'd spend hours preparing my speeches. And, I'd come up with a script, and I'd think, this is really funny. Everybody's going to really laugh at all this. And then I'd come and deliver my script, and nobody would laugh. My mum once came to watch me, and she said, they were laughing inwardly. So after a couple of years, I did get into a humorous speech contest, and I was in the semi-finals, and I got some of my friends to join. And by this stage, when you get through the rounds, if you get some laughs, basically, those passages which don't work, you go away and rewrite them. And in those days, I'd memorize every single word. And what happened was that I got there, and my friends were watching, and I started off, and I cracked this joke, and everybody roared with laughter. And then I couldn't remember which was the next script. And I remember my friends in the audience said it was like watching that Munch portrait, The Scream. But we don't go to Toastmasters to win competitions. We go for our professional development. And by this time, I was still I wasn't happy in my jobs, and I was still sort of moving around doing temps. And so my compensation was to throw myself into the Toastmasters club and to recruit people. But, you know, when I tell my friends you should come along to Toastmasters, they might come along and they say, this is weird. This is really weird. But I did meet one of my political friends, and her name was Liz. And she was trying to build a career in politics. She said to me, Brian, how should I improve my public speaking? You know, should I go to one of these professional trainers? And I said, no, don't do that. Go to Toastmasters. That's really authentic experience. So Liz went and did Toastmasters, and you know, I persuaded at least one person. So by this time, you know, I was getting towards my late 20s, and I eventually went to an interview where, you know, these round table interviews where all the candidates are in the same room. And I had to do my presentation, and I could tell, you know, my Toastmasters experience made me look really good. And do you know what? I got the job in a big organization, and I was really well paid. And then after about 6 months, I was feeling depressed. And then about 9 months clinically depressed. And after 20 months, I was fired. So, you know, and that's what comes with being able to speak up and speak out, you know, causes problems. And so I had to reinvent my life. I had to think again what to do. And the internet had come along, so I set myself up as a speechwriter. And, you know, I had to wait about a year, but I got my first client, the CEO of a big company, and I loved doing it. But I was living in London, and, you know, I was self-employed, and London is a very expensive place. So I began to realize that I wasn't secure enough. And so Darren talked about being age 35. Age 35, I put all my worldly goods in the back of a van, and I drove to Bournemouth to live where my mother was living. And now, I don't know if you know Bournemouth on the south coast of England, but it's famous for two things. The first thing is where people retire to. It's the Miami of the UK. And the other thing about Bournemouth, it's where you go to do rehab. If you're a heroin addict or you're an alcoholic, it's where they send you to dry out. But I thought again, you know, this is my opportunity. This is a chance for me to build my political base. Okay, so I joined the local political party. This was in 2005. And of course, it was dominated by pensioners. And they were making a complaint one day, saying, why are we members of this European Union? You know, we don't want to be members of this European Union. So I saw it as my opportunity to use my public speaking skills. And I said, do you know what? You know, I learnt languages at university, and this was the future. And I went to Strasbourg and lived in Strasbourg. And these wonderful things happened in 1989. It was a tremendous political change. And they listened to what I said, and they didn't like it, and they didn't pick me as the candidate. So I really had to do something radical to change. And so I thought, well, I'd come to realize that I was a kind of creative and unconventional person. And I'm looking for other creative and unconventional people. And I think that sort of one of our problems in life is, how do we get paid to do what we love? We all know that problem. And so I set up a group for creatives. And I used my experience from Toastmasters, and would meet every month, and we'd have a speaker. And the speaker, and what I introduced also was a ritual where we'd go around the room and we'd have to say what our creative talent was and where we were. So, for example, we'll have a lady who wants to do textile design, but she's selling double glazing. So she gets up and she tells us this, you know, and we all know in the room. And then you'd get these sort of novelists who'd say, well, I'm writing a novel, but I just haven't been writing it lately, and all this kind of stuff. And but then I really realized after a few meetings, they really disliked me because I made them speak in public. They hated it. They said, some of them said, I'm not coming to your meeting because you have to speak in public. And, I sort of took no notice of them. But there were some very strange characters that came to my club. And I could see there was something a bit weird about them. And I'd remembered when I was promoting Toastmasters, I used to say, one of my articles, I said, Toastmasters is Alcoholics Anonymous for people who fear public speaking. Now, there was only one problem with that. I'd never been to Alcoholics Anonymous. So how did I know? So this guy, he told me, he said, I'll take you along to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And I thought, people might think I'm an alcoholic. But when I went there, I kind of was really interested to see the comparisons with Toastmasters. For instance, I was struck by the speeches are even more rambling and incoherent. They don't do evaluations, and they're incredibly honest. And you hear these stories how they ran out of money. They went on these alcoholic binges that lasted for days, and they ended up in prison, and everybody's laughing. And, I remember this line, humor is misery remembered in tranquility. But to get to that humorous point, you've got to articulate what you think. And so I became really fascinated by the dynamics of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't realize that, alcoholism had baffled doctors for centuries. And then in the 1930s in America, they realized that that when they told their stories of how they'd overcome alcoholism to other people, it could have an impact. So the healing process basically involves public speaking. Now, what you think, it's not kind of just giving a message to a group of people and saying, you really ought to stop drinking. No, because they found that the impact of these things were not upon the membership, but it was on the speakers themselves. When they shared their guilt and the shame of what they'd done, they were not alone. They were connected to their colleagues and friends. And it struck me that this business of revealing yourself, which is what we do in Toastmasters, is incredibly important. And so what last year, I was watching the television, and there was an election on for our in our parliament, and lo and behold, I saw my friend Liz. And over the summer, it became apparent that my friend Liz Truss was going to become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the first Toastmaster graduate to do this. And my first thought was, that was supposed to be me. And my second thought is, what we do is, if we can't fulfill something ourselves, the next best thing is to help someone else achieve it. And in my tiny way, I'd given her some advice that she'd used to get to where she was for a while. And it struck me, looking back on my life, that I'd always felt it important to express what I thought and express my ideas. And most of my life, I felt I was going backwards. But as these alcoholics realized that when you can talk about your memories, you can talk about your bad experiences, you transform them into a story, into the path where you are today. And that, to me, is the healing power of public speaking. So has anybody got any questions?
Have you talked to Liz?
Well, when something happened 20 years ago, you have to check your memory, don't you? Because maybe she didn't go. Maybe I imagined it. So I wrote her a letter and I said, Liz, do you remember me? And do you remember that I recommended you go to Toastmasters? And she wrote me a nice letter back saying, yes, I do remember you. I did go to Toastmasters. And for me, it was incredibly significant because, when I talked about the Oxford Union, young politicians, they go to Oxford because they want to become something. And now I can say to people, you want to get to the top? You need to go to Toastmasters. Yeah, it's good. Sorry?
If you want to get to the top in 6 weeks.
Well, we can't control those things.
So please raise your hands if you have questions. I have the microphone here.
Hi, Brian. Thank
Hi.
you very much for your words. Could you tell us what was your healing experience through the power of words? Are you still fearful of public speaking?
Well, yes, I am, because I think that that's what we share. Ralph Smedley, who invented Toastmasters, most clubs, you join a tennis club or you join a chess club because you're good at chess or you're good at tennis. Toastmasters is for a weakness. We all share this weakness that we fear public speaking, and that creates tremendous bonds. And I think that that's the sort of the wisdom of Alcoholics Anonymous and the wisdom of Toastmasters is that you don't create strong bonds through competition. You create them through shared experience. And the point about Toastmasters is it's not an elite organization. Everybody's helping, it's not great quality, it's not brilliance. But the thing is that everybody, I could feel this morning as I listened to the contestants, I felt relaxed and I could talk to my neighbor, and we're all here just to have a bit of fun, but we're growing at the same time. And who loses? Nobody loses. Everybody loses if we all support each other. Everybody wins. Yeah.
More questions? Please raise your hands. I'll give you the microphone. Come on, don't be shy. I'll pick a volunteer, and that's not very good. Any other questions? Yes.
Hello.
So may I ask, are you a politician?
No, I'm hopeless at politics because, I express what I think, and that's a really bad idea, I can't stand any organization. I can't, in terms of my employment, but I know all the top speechwriters for all the governments, most of the governments in Europe. So you can transform your experience into something that serves these people. They love coming to my conferences because they're lonely people, in the same way that politics and corporate life, you don't thrive as a creative, it's very difficult. They're about power, and I'm not really interested in power. I'm interested in expressing myself.
Quick question. What are the similarities and differences between political speechwriting and Toastmasters speechwriting? If there are
I don't think there's anything in common whatsoever. Toastmasters is about inspiring and motivating each other. And what I did today was I told you my personal story. And sometimes you do that in politics, but only when you get to the very top, when you kind of trying to create an image sort of thing. Politics is about keeping your mouth shut and then saying things that don't upset people or position yourself. So it's a very kind of specialist use of language. And whereas Toastmasters is free and easy,
Yes, here.
Yes. Brian, being a speechwriter is kind of being the wingman of a speaker. And so how do you develop the relationship with your client in terms of being able to know them enough to really be a good wingman for them as they want to put forth their message?
Well, I think that the most important thing with being a speechwriter is that you have the time the leader doesn't, the political leader doesn't. So you can research the venue, you can find out who runs the organization, what they're doing and why this meeting is important. You've got to create a relationship of trust, and that's often difficult because they don't want to give you the time. And the other thing is that I was reading about, Spare, Prince Harry's ghostwriter has been in the press recently. And the thing is that most people can't write in a way that you want to read. They write sort of in a thinking way on the paper, whereas we have to be very disciplined and very strict about what we say. We have to try and structure things as stories. So we have to think very hard about that sort of stuff. So most people don't have the leisure to develop those skills, but that's our aptitude.
Question back here.
Darren.
Don't forget us.
Darren.
I used to be somebody.
Let me just say a few words and I'll pass the mic down. Bear with me.
What are the top 2 or 3 writing mistakes that you see at Toastmasters?
Sentences are too long. People tend to write speeches like they're essays in school. And, if you look at a film script, if you look at, the sentences are 5 words, very, very short. And that's how you've got to write. But I think most Toastmasters don't read from scripts, whereas most politicians read from scripts. So, I think that one of the lessons of Alcoholics Anonymous, I think if you want to, there's the top 20 political speeches of all time, but there's always the top 20 Alcoholics Anonymous speeches of all time. And I tell you, they are fantastic. The struggle, the pain, the suffering, and the redemption is absolutely brilliant. And why are they so good? Why are these Alcoholics Anonymous things? It's because they tell the same story at every meeting. They will have told it 100 times. And that's, what we can sort of do in Toastmasters. It's not about the, I can create something, but when I've done this 40, 50 times, it'll be pretty good. It'll be pretty good because I've relaxed. I know where the laughs come. That was the first time today. But I'd rewritten every day for the last 2 weeks. I just write it out and tried to memorize it. And I was panicking, thinking, I'm going to forget it. And I've got my scripts in the back. But the point is that it's a story and it's my story. So I shouldn't forget it. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like it all follows on. And I think that that's a very healthy process in our lives to see everything as a redemption story. That everything happened for a reason. It wasn't random, and all our sufferings and pains and disappointments were leading somewhere better. And lots of people never get that sort of time to think about their lives in that way. They just think, oh, that was a terrible experience, or oh, I was ruined by that. But it's so healthy to be able to take those painful experiences that we don't want to talk about and talk about them, because they're familiar to most other people. All these experiences of shame and failure and things like that. But it doesn't mean, it just means that we find a different place. I would not, what Liz Truss went through, she must be horrified. She became Prime Minister, it lasted for 45 days, and the terrible things they said about her, and she's blamed for all the economic catastrophe that followed, and it's like, she just wanted to do a job, but we can't control those things, and they happen. She's put Toastmasters on the map. That's what matters to me.
Any other questions? Okay, 1, 2 over there. Anyone? 1, 2.
First of all, Brian, thank you very much for your presentation. As you know, it's incredibly difficult to read a speech well. The commencement speeches of Steve Jobs and Neil Gaiman come to mind as exceptions, that they were really well done. Do you have a tip or 2 for people when they have to read the speech?
Well, I think you need big letters, and you need big spacing. When I write a script, it's about, between sentences between 5 and 10 words, and each one-line sentence, so they kind of turn the page over. You've got to learn to pause, and you want to stand behind a lectern, and it can be done, but you've got to rehearse. Many busy people say, I haven't got time to rehearse. But you've got to rehearse. You've got to sort of go in front of a group and practice it. But you want to be able to read see the first line and then finish the sentence in your head, using your head. And there are also these memory techniques, which I think, again, people haven't got the time to do. But visualizing in your head a journey and something like that, and these objects along the way of your journey. They're very interesting memory techniques, and the sort of things that Toastmasters could repopularize, but most people aren't bothered. They just want to, people reading off their PowerPoint slides. They create these huge PowerPoint slides in corporate world, and I say to them, I'm trained as a speechwriter, and we don't use slides. And they think, who the hell are you? You know what I mean? It's like, but 14 bits of information on a slide. No, it's about communicating something from inside me to you. And surely as in business or in politics, it should be the same thing. We're in this together and we're trying to do something together.
Perfect. We have 5 more minutes, so I have one question here and one question, the last 2 questions. So
My question is regarding evaluations. Evaluations, because sometimes you have you've got a speech, you've heard the speech, and there's a fine line that you might not want to cross in terms of actually expressing your true opinion about someone's speech. And obviously how they progress depends on the evaluation you give. From your experience, would you say you've been kind of, not cold-hearted, but very, very honest? If it's not good, you say it.
Well, I think that my academic training, I did a literary degree. The temptation is to be extremely honest and to analyze it as a text or something like that. But, I think the interesting thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is they're not allowed crosstalk. They're not allowed to comment on anything. And the thing is that people, by doing something over and over again, they know where they're making their mistakes and they improve. Now, you can give them a bit of guidance perhaps, but criticism is often futile, isn't it? I think in rhetoric we do this thing about don't complain about the past. When you're arguing with your family members or your wife, to complain about the past is like juristic. It's legalistic, and like it's painful and it hurts because you can never get a solution. You always say, in the future, can we make sure that the TV controller is put here rather than, being allowed to, always say, in the future, can we talk about whether we buy a washing machine from here anymore? And that's a really interesting thing. Everything has to be placed in the future, and it's called it's a part of rhetoric to say, and that's political rhetoric. In the future, we've got to do things differently, because in the past, that just creates division and pain.
you might be a very good prime minister, maybe.
Oh, thank you.
Just in case, I'm saying. Well, we have one last question. Any other questions before we summarize? No?
Hi, I'm curious about the kind of development from Toastmasters into speech writing. And the reason for that is you said at some point, I wanted to express myself, which makes sense when you think about Toastmasters. When I think about speech writing, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong here, but I see it more as a listening exercise. So I kind of wonder, was there a shift from where you said, well, I want to express myself, to all of a sudden I need to listen, whether it's internally for your own writing or for others? Was it like just a shift, or was it kind of like an organic development of your journey where you went from like, now I've spoken and now I'm going to listen?
Well, I'm a linguist, and most people in this room have learned more than one language. And, I spent my childhood doing translations and sort of rewriting things in different registers and different things. So I had that linguistic skill. And yes, it is a sort of dilemma in the sense that sometimes I like, you don't want to say it like that, you want to say it like this. But I started off as a journalist, and journalism is a terribly difficult career, and lots of journalists have had to reinvent themselves. And it just seemed to me natural that, having been at Toastmasters, I learned a bit about public speaking, and a lot of my work was like birthday speeches and wedding speeches. And so, it was like, when you have a vocabulary book and you have these phrases, French phrases and French or German phrases, I'd collect all these jokes. So somebody would say to me, he was 30 years old and he was, and I'd go through these questions, does the groom drink too much? Is he into fashion? Does he like fast cars? How did he meet his wife? You go through the same questions and you've got these phrases that you just drop in. So it becomes like painting by numbers sort of thing. And then you personalize it a bit. But it's kind of a linguistic exercise, speech writing. And sometimes I like to express myself, but most of the time I realize it's very professional, and people need an interpreter. I'm their interpreter. You think you can say this in front of a crowd? Well, try it. Nobody's going to respond. You know, that's the thing. So is that it? Is that the?
Yeah.
Can I just say one last thing? What I like to think about, do you remember the Shawshank Redemption? Yeah. Do you remember Red, the Morgan Freeman character? I think it's a very interesting development, and I think this is how we learn in Toastmasters to a certain extent, is he comes in after 20 years, and there's this panel, and they say to him, do you think you've been rehabilitated? And he says, I sure do, I'm ready to leave, and things like that, and then they say, rejected. After 30 years, they say, do you think you've been rehabilitated? He said, yeah, I have. I think I have. I'm ready to go back into society, and they're rejected. And the third time, he goes in after 40 years, and they say, do you think you've been rehabilitated? Rehabilitated? That's just a dumb word used by politicians to say, you can wear a suit, and I can look a fool. Why don't you just go and, he said, I deeply regret what I did. But just stamp that form and we can all get it over with. And of course, it's accepted. And that's the thing about, we learn these skills so we think we can persuade people to let us get what we want. But ultimately, we find our own voice and we get to express our own desires. And often that is against authority. We don't want the authority. We just want to accept and make peace with our own lives. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. First of all, there's a QR code here. You can scan it and give honest, you said honest, right? Honest evaluation feedback to Brian. Now we have two announcements. We will have a 10-minute break before the evaluation contest. It's a barcode. And also the workshop will start at 2:20, not 2:30, 2:20. So if you have signed up for the workshops, it will be in 15 minutes, not at 2:30. Having said that, let's have a 10-minute break. The contest will take place here, yes. No, 15 minutes.
Like this, and then this one, I can sit here.
Yes.
And then
It's already turned on. Okay.
it's on now.
Yes, because they switch off